Hi, welcome to our next segment in our subunit related to the art of ancient Rome. In our last segment, we looked at panel painting, and then we looked at the Republican art. This was before Rome was an empire and a republic, um, and we looked at some sculpture. Now we're going to look at the art of ancient Rome during this idea of the early empire and the high empire. Um, so the early Roman Empire was the time of the charismatic leader Julius Caesar, who conquered northern Europe. Caesar wanted to be made emperor. Civil war disrupts for 13 years, and Caesar was murdered on the steps of the Senate on the Ides of March. And this is a day on the Roman calendar that corresponds to the 15th of March. It was marked by several religious observances and became notorious as the date of the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. The death of Caesar made the Ides of March a turning point in Roman history as one of the events that marked the transition from the historical period known as the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Eventually, Caesar was deified and made a god. So Julius Caesar adopted a nephew, Octavian, who would eventually become emperor. In 32 BC, he defeats the forces of Antony and Cleopatra, and 3 years later is made emperor. He takes the name Augustus. He sees himself as a god with divine lineage. Augustus ushers in 150 years of peace known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. So what you're looking at is a sculpture. The original was done in bronze, and this is a marble copy that we're looking at that was discovered in 1863 in the villa of Livia at Prima Porta near Rome. This was the wife of Julius Caesar. This was her villa. And it's a statue that portrays Augustus as a general. So hopefully when you're looking at it, you can see some similarities, um, maybe to some Greek sculpture that we looked at earlier. Um, so one of the things we're going to be looking at is this idea of propaganda and how Augustus really tried to use the power of images um, for political power and prestige. Today, politicians think very carefully about how they will be photographed. Think about all the campaign commercials and print ads we are bombarded with every election season. These images tell us a lot about the candidate, including what they stand for and what agendas they are promoting. Similarly, Roman art was closely intertwined with politics and propaganda. This is especially true with the portraits of Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. Augustus invoked the power of imagery to communicate his ideology. So, one of Augustus's most famous portraits is the Augustus prima porta, which was done in 20 BCE. And at first glance, the statue might appear to simply resemble a portrait of Augustus as an orator and general, but this sculpture also communicates a good deal about the emperor's power and ideology. In fact, in this portrait, Augustus shows himself as a great military victor and a staunch supporter of Roman religion. The statue also foretells the 200-year period of peace that Augustus initiated called the Pax Romana. So hopefully with my earlier question, if it reminded you of any earlier Greek pieces, Polyclitus's The Spear Bearer came to mind, and Caesar is deliberately recalling the golden age of ancient Greece. In this marble freestanding sculpture, Augustus stands in contrapposto. This is a relaxed pose where one leg bears the weight. Please learn that term. Some of you are still not using that term when describing Greek art. And you do the definition, but I want you to use the word contrapposto. The emperor also wears military regalia, and his arm is outstretched, demonstrating that the emperor is addressing his troops. We immediately sense the emperor's power as a leader of the army and a military conqueror. Delving further into the composition of the prima porta statue, distinct resemblance to Polyclitus's Doryphorus or spear bearer, a classical Greek sculpture of the 5th century BCE, is apparent. Both have similar contrapposto stances, both are idealized. This is to say that both Augustus and the spear bearer are portrayed as youthful and flawless individuals. They are perfect. The Romans often modeled their art on Greek predecessors. This is significant because Augustus is essentially depicting himself with the perfect body of a Greek athlete. Um, he is youthful and virile, despite the fact that he was middle-aged at the time of the sculpture's commissioning. Furthermore, by modeling the prima porta statue on such an iconic Greek sculpture created during the height of Athens' influence and power, Augustus connects himself to the golden age of that previous civilization. So there are lots of elements going on to really reinforce his political power and authority, and he's doing this in a very deliberate way. This is a detail. This is the Cupid and dolphin detail that is at the base of the statue. So far, the message of the Augustus of Prima Porta is clear. Augustus is an excellent orator, a military victor with the youthful, perfect body of a Greek athlete. Um, is that all there is to the sculpture? Definitely not. The sculpture contains even more symbolism. First, at Augustus's right leg is a Cupid figure riding a dolphin. So this is from mythology. The dolphin became a symbol of Augustus's great naval victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a conquest that made Augustus the sole ruler of the empire. The Cupid astride the dolphin sends another message too, that Augustus is descended from the gods. Cupid is the son of Venus, the Roman goddess of love. Julius Caesar, the adopted father of Augustus, claimed to be descended from Venus, and therefore Augustus also shared this connection to the gods. So, like other previous cultures, we definitely saw with Egypt and Mesopotamia, this sort of investiture, this idea of the right to rule, or having this sort of divine lineage enabling your ability to rule is something that he's incorporating. Something hopefully you noticed when comparing and contrast, let me go back, Polyclitus's the spear bearer and the Augustus Prima Porta is that um, Augustus is clothed. Here we see this is a good way to tell the difference between Greek art and Roman art, because Romans are often clothed. It's the Greeks that really embrace the nude male figure, and later in the late classical and Hellenistic period, the female nude. So he has this a really beautiful breastplate, um, and that has a lot of iconography and symbolism associated with it. And so this was called a cuirass, Cuirass, or a breastplate, and it's covered with figures that communicate additional propagandistic messages. Scholars debate over the identification of each of these figures, but the basic meaning is clear. Augustus has the gods on his side. He is an international military victor, and he is the bringer of the Pax Romana. Remember, the Roman peace, a peace that encompasses all the lands of the Roman Empire. In the central zone of the cuirass or breastplate are two figures, a Roman and a Parthenian. A Parthian. On the left, the enemy Parthian returns military standards. This is a direct reference to an international diplomatic victory of Augustus in 20 BCE, where these standards, remember, a standard is a symbol, usually some sort of like an eagle, or that they carry on a pole when they're marching. And these standards were finally returned to Rome after a previous battle. It's innovative because not only is Augustus noting an actual historical event, but he's also referencing mythology. So he's referencing mythology as well as this idea of historical specificity, and that's a term I also want you to get used to and to start learning. Um, with Roman art, we see some other differences with Greek. If we look at the face of the Augustus prima porta, it actually does resemble Augustus. He definitely has a unique hairstyle, and this is said to look like him. Whereas with Greek statues, they didn't really represent an individual. And so here we're getting with the Romans this idea of historical specificity. Surrounding the central zone on the breastplate are gods and personifications. At the top are Sol and Celis, the sun and sky gods, respectively. On the sides of the breastplate are female personifications of countries conquered by Augustus. These gods and personifications refer to the Pax Romana. The message is that the sun is going to shine on all regions of the Roman Empire, bringing peace and prosperity to all citizens. And of course, Augustus is the one who is responsible for this abundance throughout the empire. Beneath the female personification are Apollo and Diana, two major deities in the Roman pantheon. Clearly, Augustus is favored by these important deities, and their appearance here demonstrates that the emperor supports traditional Roman religion. At the very bottom of the breastplate is Tellus, the earth goddess, who cradles two babies and holds a cornucopia. This is sort of like a horn, usually that has fruit or something in it. Tellus is an additional allusion to the Pax Romana, as she is a symbol of fertility with her healthy babies and overflowing horn of plenty. So lots of iconography going on there. I started to note this earlier, encouraged you guys to observe the detail in the face. One of the things that we notice is the distinct cowlick on Augustus's hairline. Every artist who has depicted Augustus includes this detail. So this is something he really must have had. And so with Roman sculpture, and in particular this portrait of Augustus, there's a blend of idealism and specificity that we haven't seen before. Um, Ears are very individualized, another specific trait of Augustus. Even though Augustus lived to be 76 years old, he was always depicted as a vigorously eternal young ruler. So while he was, there were these sort of specific individual facial features, he still wanted to be idealized and portrayed as youthful as well. This work demonstrates the creative combination of earlier sculptural traditions that is a hallmark of Augustan art. In its idealization of a specific ruler and his prowess, the sculptor also illustrates the way Roman empires would continue to use portraiture for propaganda and not only express their authority directly, but root it in powerful traditional stories and styles. So again, this is not simply a portrait. Um, um, and it's a good example of one of the ways the ancients used art for propagandistic purposes. Overall, the statue is not simply a portrait of the emperor; it expresses Augustus's connection to the past, his role as a military victor, and his connection to the gods, and also his role as the bringer of Roman peace. And so there were copies of this portrait or statue. And again, this was meant to sort of inspire the troops of Augustus. Also, let me go back. Like most sculpture, and it's hard for us to think about this, and we forget that it was painted, like the Greeks painted their statues in these kind of garish colors. So that's an example of what it probably would have looked like painted. You're looking at in this next work is the Arapacus Augusta. This was done between 13 and 9 BCE. And this is an altar of Augustan peace, which was originally located along a major Roman road. It was begun in 13 BCE and dedicated in 9 BCE on the occasion of Augustus's triumphal return to the capital after 3 years spent establishing Roman rule in Gaul and Hispania. The structure was aligned with a giant sundial marked out on the pavement with lines and bronze inscriptions using as its pointer an Egyptian obelisk that Augustus had earlier brought from Heli, Heliopolis to signify Roman dominion over this ancient land. So this is, after he conquered Egypt. Um, so the structure is important because it again sort of gives you this idea of how Augustus was really referring or referencing this idea of the Greek Golden Age and sort of trying to link himself to that age. The structure consists of a wall rectangular enclosure surrounding an open air altar, again, sort of emulating a Greek custom. It's made entirely of marble panels carved with elaborate relief sculptures. The monument presented a powerful propaganda uniting portraiture, allegory, religion, and politics. It incorporates a single axis approach and Etruscan influences. Again, remember Greeks would have had multiple entryways. The use of a marble panel shows the admiration of the Greek Golden Age of the High Classical period. We'll look at it in closer detail. Only official imperial structures like this were worthy of this fine material. So remember the Romans were more practical, and we'll see that after Augustus, where they started to use marble. I mean, did not use marble, but would use volcanic rock and tufa. Eventually, they would create concrete, and would often, use panel painting or faux painting to make it look like marble, even though it wasn't. But in this case, this is all marble, and it's intentional, and again, a direct reference to the golden age of art in Greece. And so by using this material, um, again, this references the idea that Augustus is establishing a new golden age for Rome. The structure is elevated on a podium-like Roman temple of Fortunus. I showed you that in the last segment. Plasters or flattened columns have no structural support and are purely decorative, referencing the second style, um, architectural style in Roman wall painting. Augustus dedicated the structure to Livia, his wife, on her birthday. On the exterior, the altar is composed of figural reliefs and lavish scrolling acanthus leaves populated by animals, promoting the theme of nature and abundance. So the Romans, again, really loved nature, I think because they lived in such an urban metropolitan environment. On the inner walls, foliated garlands are suspended in swags from ox skulls. Um, the skulls symbolize sacrificing. And I'll get to that picture so you can see all the different relief carvings. Sacrificial offerings at the altar during annual commemorations. And the garlands, depicting fruit and flowers from every season, signify the continuing peace and prosperity that Augustus brought to the Roman world. The plants and flowers depicted are identifiable. There have been at least 50 different variations depicted, and shows how artists observed nature. Um, and this observation of nature symbolizes Augustus's bounty and Rome's fertility and strength. And so what we would have is these sort of four outer panels depict carefully selected mythological subjects. We're not going to look at all of them, but we'll take a look at one. So this is a detail of one of the reliefs on the outer four walls of the altar of peace. This is called the allegory of peace. And what we see is a seated matron with babies on her lap being depicted. Her identity is uncertain. Some historians think it's an allegorical figure, Tellus, who was the mother of Earth, or Pax, the the um, the allegorical figure of peace. Um, who she is, whoever she is, she really embodies this idea of the fruits of the Pax Augusta. We see two personifications of breeze. These are really beautiful. These two figures with billowing um, fabric um, and this billowing drapery. Again, this is very similar and a direct reference probably to classical Greek sculpture. In addition, the elements of earth, sky, water are also depicted. Um, so again, something like this, you might think, oh, this looks Greek, and it does, and it definitely has a Greek reference. However, the Greeks were different. Number one, the figures would be nude, and two, they were a little bit more austere in the use of their negative space, where um, again, the Romans loved nature and just tried to cram in all the negative space, animals, plants. And so that's a sort of innovation or stylistic convention that will help you sort of distinguish um, uh, early empirical Roman art from high classical Greek art. I love this swan right here. It's very charming. Um, So this Roman relief from the Areopagus Augustus possesses some of the same quietness and serenity in the figures as the Greek stele grave markers. So this was one of the steles that we looked at when we were looking at the Greek classical age. However, very different in the depictions of animals, birds around the figure. So here, this is more of a domestic scene, and again, very quiet and still. And here you have all these birds and animals and vegetation sort of in the negative space. But definitely referencing, this is definitely referencing that high classical or the golden age in Greek sculpture. Remember that Romans love nature. While the figures look Greek with the wet drapery, the Greeks would have not included all these references to nature around the figure, which is a Roman convention. These symbols of bounty and fertility encourage citizens to procreate. Again, Augustus is trying to symbolize Rome as a cornucopia of bounty and fertility. So on the longer side of the altar, there's depicted a relief carving of an imagined procession of a dedicated ceremony of the altar um, and who specifically attended. So remember this idea of historical specificity with Roman art. And this relief definitely recalls the Greek pantheistic procession depicted on the frieze of the Parthenon. So he's looking to that reference, but there are some definite differences. So this is the imperial procession from the Areopagus Augusta, and again it's very reminiscent of the frieze, the pantheistic frieze from the Parthenon. When we look at it, notice the use of various relief of depth of the figures, as well as the use of overlapping figures to give an illusion of depth. Children are depicted acting up and being playful to promote fertility, procreation, and family. Augustus was concerned about the birth rate in the empire, and he really wanted to increase it. And so this was, again, used to symbolize that notion. Members of Augustus's family might be represented. The middle-aged man with the shoulder-shrouded head at the far left is generally accepted to be the posthumous portrait of Archus Agrippa, Augustus's successor, if he had not died in 12 BCE. The heavily swathed woman next to Agrippa on the right may be Augustus's wife, Livia. The bored youngster pulling on Agrippa's robe and being restrained by the hand of the man behind him is probably Agrippa's son, Gaius Caesar. Next to Livia is probably Tiberius, who would become the next emperor. Again, the depiction of children and women in an official relief was new to the Augustan period and reflects the emperor's desire to promote family life as well as to emphasize his potential heirs and thus the um, continuality of the dynasty. Here's a better picture of it. Sorry, I don't know I had it. So, again, it's funny to see these children, sort of being depicted like real children would act. They're kind of bored. They don't want to just stand still, and so they're tugging and trying to get attention from the adults. What you're looking at now is a comparison with a detailed procession from the Ionic frieze from the east side of the Greek temple of the Parthenon. Um, this is it right here. The imperial procession is very different, the one up here, than the Greek. In the Greek Parthenon frieze, the figures are anonymous and acting out an event that occurs every 4 years. The Areopagus relief depicts a specific event. So again, this is a historical, specificity idea. Um, and, and again, this sort of innovation in Roman art. And so this historical event is the dedication of the altar, and it's depicting specific members of Augustus's extended family as well. So there's, definitely specific figures. Well, the figures in the pantheistic frieze are more types. There's not individuals represented or a specific person in history, but this idea of this pantheistic procession that happens every 4 years where this one, this frieze is depicting a specific event, a future one, but a specific event, specific individuals. The figures in the Parthenon frieze, again, were generic figures, water bearers, maidens, horse riders. The Romans know the Romans are knowingly making reference to the Parthenon, but still maintain a Roman literalness, and again, this idea of historic specificity. All right, so I'm going to stop here, and in our next segment, we're going to be looking at some more architecture. We're going to be looking at the Colosseum, or better known as the Flavian Theater, and we're going to be looking at another emperor, Vespasian. So stay tuned.